Hi, my name's Leo and I'm a boat builder and a sailor. Back in 2017 I bought a very old and quite famous wooden sailing yacht for the price of $1, and since then I've been rebuilding it from the keel up with the help of a lot of amazing people. Now I recently had to take a quick trip back to the UK for various reasons, so there hasn't been as much work going on the boat and I haven't been here filming, so this video is a bit different. It's all about Taliho's tender, the dinghy that's going to sit on the deck of Taliho and be used to get inshore from anchorages and to explore areas where Taliho is too big and too deep to go. First, we're going to look at the tender that Albert Strange actually designed to go with Taliho and whether or not that is suitable, and then look at the requirements for a cruising tender in general and some of our other options. So Albert Strange did design and draw a tender for Taliho, but we don't have a lot of information about it. We don't actually know if it was ever even built. All we have is this one drawing, which doesn't have a lot of detail, but it is very interesting. So you can see it's a 14-foot motor dinghy, and the design is really nice. You can see it's got an inboard engine here. There's a propeller sort of encapsulated within the centerline. It's got a lovely little foredeck here with a coaming. It's got a tiller and an outboard hung rudder. And then it's got thwarts here for seating and a seat sort of all around the aft quarters as well. And a pretty flat build, which is typical of a sort of motor launch like this. Quite elegant lines by the looks of it, and expects to be built out of teak or mahogany planking on elm frames and elm centerline. Now this sort of design I would describe more as a motor launch, and it would have worked really well for what Taliho was designed to do, which was to go fishing and race out of the south of England, which she never would have gone out for many days at a time, and she probably wasn't doing much cruising, so she would usually be coming back to her home port. What that means probably is that they wouldn't be launching this boat very often. They might leave this boat on a mooring that Taliho would leave. You would be able to get this boat onto the deck of Taliho using the davits, but it would require a few people and would be probably quite heavy and a little bit awkward. I imagine that wouldn't have been done very often. Now this is a really, really lovely boat, but unfortunately it's not really a very suitable tender for a cruising yacht. And that's because it's too heavy, it's too long, it takes up too much room on deck, and it would be too awkward to launch quickly and easily, and too awkward to pull up a beach. Generally just a heavy, sort of cumbersome boat, even though a really lovely one. So, you know, unfortunately I don't think this is going to be Taliho's cruising tender, but I would love to build this boat, and I intend to build this boat one day. For now, let's talk about what we do need in a sailing yacht tender. So like sailing vessels, tenders come in all different shapes and sizes, but I should probably back up just for a second because I haven't actually explained what a tender is. A tender is just a smaller boat which services a larger boat by running between the boat and the shore when the boat is on the mooring or on an anchor. Now tenders are very often dinghies, especially on smaller boats. A dinghy is an unballasted small boat, but on larger boats like cruise ships or even much larger yachts, a tender could be a more substantial boat like a motor launch. The boat that Albert Strange drew is could be described as either, because it's right on that line I would say, but it is verging on more of a motor launch style size. For a cruising yacht, a tender is a really, really important part of its equipment. It's vital because very often a cruising yacht might be anchored for a long time or on a mooring ball, and so you need that tender just to get off the boat. Right now we're in a marina, but with the sort of cruising I hope to do, I probably won't spend much time at all in marinas. Bearing that in mind, the tender has to be easily stowed on deck, which means it has to be light enough to be able to lift up using a halyard or just by lifting it bodily up from the water onto the boat. It has to not be in the way when it's on deck, because it will have to live there for a long time when you're on passage, crossing oceans and so on. And then of course it has to be pretty seaworthy, because you might have to use it to take yourself inshore up through surf, onto beaches, in bad weather, in wind, in rain, in waves, and so on. So it has to be a good boat, it has to be able to carry your crew, it has to be able to carry your shopping or whatever gear you need to take on and off the boat. It also has to be very strong generally because it's quite possible that it could get rolled in the surf. You quite often might have to drag it up the beach, drag it down the beach. It might get squashed between boats. Tenders get into all sorts of scrapes, and so having a strong, sturdy, tough tender is really nice. It's also especially nice if the tender is fun, and though this isn't essential, there's nothing nicer, I don't think, than arriving at an anchorage, launching your tender, and then rowing or sailing your tender around the other boats, maybe sailing ashore to the bar or to get your groceries, maybe rowing back to your boat after a couple of beers. It's a really nice luxury to have a tender that you actually enjoy using and that has a sailing rig and rows well as well. Now these days it's very common to see inflatable boats used as tenders, either fully inflatable or a rib, which is rigid inflatable boat, which has a solid bottom but an inflatable tube around the edge. These are very practical in a lot of ways and very buoyant of course, but they're no fun, you can't sail them, they row generally really badly, and there's always a risk of popping a tube. They're also pretty ugly. Outboard motors on tenders generally are really common these days, of course, and of course they do have a time and a place, but it's pretty annoying to have outboards buzzing around all the time in an anchorage. I love seeing people rowing their tenders or sailing their tenders, and it's also a much more pleasant way to get around, even if it does take a little bit longer. Of course, the big advantage with an inflatable tender is that it can be deflated and rolled up or folded up to be stored much more compactly on deck than a rigid solid boat. I've seen a lot of different types of tender. You sometimes see people using kayaks or canoes as tenders, even surfboards. Of course, you get a lot of people using electric outboards these days, which is really nice, a lot quieter. All sorts of rigid boats. You see wooden tenders, plywood, fiberglass. Traditionally built wooden tenders are lovely. They're not so common these days, and one of the reasons is that because they live on deck a lot of the time, it's easy for that tender to dry out because it's not living in the water. The wood will dry out, it can shrink, and then when you do put it in, it'll leak, which isn't ideal. So that's an extra step of maintenance to make sure that wood is kept wet. So as you can see, there's a lot of things to take into consideration when choosing a tender, and I have been thinking about it quite a lot, particularly about where that tender will live on deck, because although Taliho is quite a large boat, ideally I'd really like to keep the side decks clear and not have anything over the skylight blocking the light. An inflatable dinghy is, of course, an obvious, sensible solution, but I just feel like it wouldn't really fit Taliho's character and style. It's not really the aesthetic that I like, and they're not that fun. I would really love to have a tender that I can sail and that I can row. I really enjoy rowing as well as sailing, but of course it also has to be strong and it has to fit on deck. So there's a lot to ask, but recently I did find a boat which I think might fulfill a lot of those requirements. So I was just wandering around the docks getting some footage of different tenders and came across the Cape Clear, which is a fishing schooner. They catch salmon, and one of the really cool things about this small business is that they deliver a lot of their fish locally by bicycle. So we're going to meet one of their crew.
So my name is Kayla, and this was my first summer on the Cape Clear. My mom dated Rick for a few years, and they are business partners today. They've been working on this boat for 10 years, and this was the first summer that it went out. So one really cool thing about the way that we catch our fish is that we catch, clean, and freeze on the boat. So all of our fish is frozen within an hour. We sell directly to our customers, which is Port Townsend, and the people and the businesses here, and we deliver all of our fish on bicycles.
Right away.
So amazingly, I think I may have sort of inadvertently, accidentally stumbled across the perfect cruising dinghy and Taliho's ideal tender, at least for my use. Now there's a few really amazing things about this boat that I'm going to show you, but a couple of those things are that A, it was actually designed and built right here in Port Townsend, so I was able to meet the designer and actually borrow one of these boats to see if it's going to work for me. And B, this is an 11-foot long dinghy, but right now it is stored in the 6-foot bed of my truck. Seems unlikely, but I'm going to show you. So this design of dinghy is called a PT11, PT for Port Townsend, and it's 11 foot long. And as you can see, it's a nesting dinghy, which means the bow of the boat separates from the stern of the boat, and then the bow actually fits inside the stern. And so of course it takes up a lot less space on the deck of a bigger boat or even in the back of a truck. It rows beautifully. It's a real pleasure to row, and that was part of the design criteria. It was designed by a local guy called Russell Brown, who we'll hopefully meet later on. And yeah, he wanted it to be light, strong, row really well, and sail really well, because it does have a sailing rig. So I'm definitely going to check that out really soon, but first of all I do want to make sure that this will fit on the deck of Taliho. I'm hoping it'll fit in between the main companionway hatch and the skylight hatch, which would actually leave both the side decks completely clear when cruising, which is something you wouldn't be able to do with a larger dinghy. So Taliho has a new neighbour in the boat shed, a really lovely little boat called Kintore. She's a sort of trawler yacht motor sailor, Bill Gardner design, and she's come in for some maintenance from our friends in the adjoining workshop. So they're going to be doing a pretty thorough paint job, and we're going to be following along a little bit. But right now it's time to take that PT11 nesting dinghy up onto the deck of Taliho and check to see if and where we can fit it on the deck. So as you can see, the dinghy fits really snugly in between the main companionway hatch and the skylight hatch, and that's a real relief because I took some rough measurements, but I wasn't certain it was actually going to fit. But this is a huge benefit because it means we can keep the side decks clear, completely clear, because the nested dinghy is so short when it is in its nested position. And that's a huge advantage because obviously you can walk along either side of the boat then, depending on what tack you're on, and also leave space for the headsail sheets to run freely. So that's really nice. It doesn't have to live between the hatches. It could also live assembled or nested on the side decks if that's easier for shorter passages or just day sailing. But for longer passages, I think it'll be really valuable to leave it between the hatches like this, and I'm really pleased that it fits there.
I can't start. You have to start.
Okay. Leo, we're terrible at this.
No, you're great.
I think we're doing good.
My name's Nick, and I paint old wood boats.
My name's Daryl Dietrich. I've worked in the port for over 11 years. For the last couple years, I have not been working down here, but I made a comeback to work with Nick and the crew at the shop, and we just finished pretty little Kintore.
And me and Daryl have come full circle because
yeah.
Daryl has been one of my mentors and one of the people who taught me how to paint wood boats.
On this project, Kintore, we painted the hull, we painted Morgan's stripe, we took out the boot stripe, which is awesome, did all the green.
Had a couple painting anomalies that happened and had to improvise a little bit, but overall I think we did a pretty good comeback with that.
Pretty stellar job.
Yep.
Pretty straightforward job.
I think we got it, guys. That was awesome.
Oh, great. Oh my God.
I want to be good at that.
I'm gonna sleep for 2 days after this.
Well, it's really cool to see Kintore launched and looking so good. Now, I just want to remind you guys that, throughout all of this time and the time that Kintore was in the shed, which was several weeks, there has been continuous work going on Taliho, some of which has been covered in previous videos and a lot of which is going to be covered in the next video or two. Just due to the nature of those jobs and the length of those jobs and wanting to present them with a story and a start and an end, it hasn't worked to put much of that work into this video. Anyway, right now we're going to go and meet the guy who made and designed that dinghy, the PT11. His name's Russell Brown, and his workshop is just up the road in an old chicken coop, actually, on a really beautiful farm property.
My name's Russell Brown, and I am a wood epoxy boat builder. I love wood. I love working with epoxy, and I love lightweight boats. I've worked at kind of at the very cutting edge of boat building and like composite shops. America's Cup, I was involved in a cup campaign, and we built 2 boats, and I really fell out of love with composites as a result of that. I don't like the waste that's generated. I don't like the fact that those boats are not competitive after a season or 2 of racing. They really have no use, and composites only really give you a very slight weight advantage over wood epoxy, and they don't generally last. Composite boats, fiberglass boats, they're not loved like wood epoxy boats are. They don't generate that feeling that makes people want to keep their boats forever and keep them going forever. Epoxy is largely made of byproducts from oil refining. Of course, wood grows on trees. I'm interested in kind of helping promote wood epoxy as a future method for building boats that people will love and cherish and race and cruise for, generations. So I have been in this shop for 33 years. My 3rd or 4th cruising boat I built in here, and I did a Pacific crossing in the boat. I had a nesting dinghy on board for that trip, and that trip made me start really thinking hard about nesting dinghies. The boat I was cruising on was pretty unorthodox, and people really didn't know what to think of it, but they all loved the dinghy. That was what sent me down this path of trying to develop the world's best nesting dinghy. This is a PT11 nesting dinghy. It was developed as a dinghy for serious cruisers. A lot of development went into this boat. I built 8 prototypes. All of those prototypes were built to update the boat and update the manual. So the building manual for this boat is 300 pages. It's mostly photographs, and it's done in such a way that a total amateur can build a pretty nice boat. A big part of what's needed in a boat like this is something that's both really light and really strong. And a lot of effort went into making the boat as light as possible, but still making it rugged. And by rugged, I mean strong. If you get tumbled in the surf and the boat goes up on the rocks, it's also very kind of wear resistant and ding resistant. Every surface has been fiberglass. Edges have been toughened. There's a lot of selective reinforcement in the boat. So it's not the quickest thing to build one of these boats, but they could last for 100 years or more. It weighs 90 pounds, so each half is 45 pounds. It has a watertight daggerboard trunk cap that keeps the water from coming in when you're towing the boat. It has a watertight hatch that's actually truly watertight. It's airtight. Big buoyancy chambers up forward and back here. One of the innovations on this boat is the assembly method, assembling the 2 halves. Alignment of the 2 halves is done by these little clips, and then joining the halves is done with this threaded hardware. Assembly can be done in the water in 30 seconds. It can be done on dry land in about the same amount of time. And then you pull it back all the way. And voila! One of the criteria for this boat was a boat that sails really well and is also extremely quick to rig and de-rig. The sailing rig for this boat weighs 10.5 pounds. It fits into a small tubular bag. The boat can be rigged for sailing in 2 or 3 minutes. And that's really important if you sail into some beautiful anchorage and the sun's going down and it's almost dinner time and you want to go check out the anchorage. You can throw the rig in the boat and jump in it and go have a great adventure before dinner. The sailing rig for this boat is the lightest rig I think ever developed for a dinghy, and it's also the quickest to set up and break down. The other interesting thing about this boat is how well it rows. It's not a sprinting boat, but it takes very little effort to go, a respectable cruising speed. This little number 44 back there, that's a race number for the 70-48 race, and this boat has been rowed twice by a woman who's my age. She's rowed this boat 70 miles in roughly 20 hours, nonstop. That is an average speed of around 3.5 knots. I think it's quite remarkable for nonstop 70 miles of rowing. I've designed and built a lot of boats, mostly for myself, but this boat is the only boat that I've ever designed that I don't really have any reservations about. I don't have to squint at it. I generally just really like this boat.
So this is the entire rig for the PT11, and I love how simple it is and how light it is. Taliho's rig is going to be pretty complex, pretty traditional. This is a very different approach, not traditional, but really nice to be able to just really quickly set up and go sailing on the dinghy, and that means that you'll actually use the rig a lot more if it's simple like this. So the spars are carbon fiber. These two slot together like this to make the mast, and you can see by how I'm holding these how lightweight they are. The boom is also extremely lightweight and has all of the control lines on it. There's no halyards on this boat because the sail slips over the top of the mast. It's got a sort of sleeve inside the sail. So the control lines are just the sheet and then a boom vang and an outhaul, and that's it. It's all very lightweight, all very simple. So I think it's time we take this boat out for a sail. So I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see or hear me right now, but I'm out sailing the PT11 and with no hands. One of the fun, clever things about the design of this boat is that the little tiller extension here will jam into the corner of the boat there and hold the boat on course, and then you can kind of steer using your weight, and you can just put a little knot in the sheet here, and that holds the sheet, and I'm just steering by shifting my weight to port to turn the boat to starboard and shifting to starboard to turn to port, but you don't need to do much really. So it's a good time to have some lunch or drink a beer or whatever makes you happy. So I've been trying out one of Russell's PT11s for a little while now, and I've actually sailed it a few times. I've taken it on a few camping trips. I've used the boat quite a lot, and I have to say I've really loved this boat. It's such a joy to sail, it's such a joy to row, it looks so good, it is so practical in the way that it nests so neatly. It's just a great boat, and I think Russell was being very modest. The engineering and design challenges of making a boat that performs that well in so many different ways and just splits it right in half it's a huge challenge, and it's very impressive what he's managed to do. So I am actually going to go ahead and purchase this boat as one of the tenders for Taliho. Normally you can only purchase these boats as kits to build yourself, but Russell has been kind enough to sell me one of the ones that he made himself. Now this video is not sponsored in any way, but I will put a link in the video description to the website where you can buy these kits if you want to build one yourself, because I just think they're great boats and I want to support what Russell does. Now they're not cheap boats, but I think it's very clear why that is, and I really don't think there's anything else out there which does so much so well. Now my only reservation about using this boat as the main tender for Taliho is its size. You can fit 4 people in there, but it would be quite a squeeze, and if you have to get a lot of crew on or off the boat, that could be tricky. So I probably will be having another tender on board. It's really good to have 2 tenders if you can, especially if you've got a few crew, because that means different people can go off and do different things at the same time and no one gets stuck on the boat. The second tender probably will be an inflatable dinghy, possibly with an electric outboard, because they are very practical for moving a lot of people or a lot of equipment, a lot of groceries, and they're very stable in rough weather and so on. So that probably will be the second tender, and then of course there'll also be an automatically inflating life raft in its own box as part of the safety equipment. Now of course there's a lot more I could say about tenders, about Taliho's tender, about the PT11, but I think I've talked enough for one video. So thanks a lot for watching, and a massive thank you to everyone who has donated or otherwise supported this project. It does make a huge difference, and it means that we're able to keep on doing this work, and I'm able to keep on making and editing these videos. So I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.